So welcome to my 7 essential muting techniques for the ukulele. Number 1, right-handed mutes. Okay, making sound, making it stop. You do this by first strumming and then placing the palm of your hand onto the strings. Not so hard that you go. We're not trying to do a percussive technique. We're just trying to make it be quiet. Okay. Also for upstrums. So it can be done downstrum or upstrum. The next one that I'm going to get into is the 2 different variations of chucks. So this is techniques 2 and 3. So technique number 2, chucking with your right hand or your strumming hand. This is one that a lot of people focus on when they're beginners and kind of use a little bit less as they go on, because it's not quite as consistent as using your left hand to create the mute. But anyway, this is a good one, essential for beginners. So what you're going to do is this. So what I'm doing there is I am moving my hand down to strum, but before I hit the strings with my index finger, this part of my hand, the side, lands on the strings, and that mutes the strings. Okay? Then I strum. So your hand is away, like a waving hello kind of a shape. Then you bring your index finger down. Okay, that's what's going to strum. Now, with this hand, you bring it towards the strings, touch the strings, and then with your index finger, hit the strings. That's called a chuck, or some people call it a chunk. But that's using your right hand to create it. And the way that would appear in a strumming pattern or something like that would be so that's sort of usually a fill-in for the snare drum on a drum kit. So we'd usually do that to sort of substitute for drums. Very important. Technique number 3. Using your left hand to create the chuck, or to create the mute in a chuck. So this one is a little bit less intuitive. With the right hand stuff, people are really like, rhythm happens in this hand, everything happens in this hand. But for this, not so much. Your left hand creates the mute and your right hand does the strum. Okay, so in its most basic sense, you're going to gently place your fingers across the strings. Now, not so hard that you pull the strings down and create notes. You don't want notes, you want this sound. Okay, nice and quiet. Just a sort of a percussive drum sound. So, just like the last one, this one would appear in a similar way in a strumming pattern. So just gently placing my fingers on the strings and then hitting the strings. Okay, that is a left-handed chuck. That's technique number 3. Technique number 4. This one is a left-handed mute for chords that have open strings. So something like a C chord. You're only holding down one note there, and the rest of those strings are open. So how would you go about muting this? The answer is similar to the last one. Whatever fingers are up this side of the chord, as in the farthest up the neck, are going to lay down across the strings, gently touching them, and that way they'll become quiet. So that's the chord. Apply your fingers, and suddenly it goes quiet. Now the reason you have to go on this side of the chord with your muting fingers is because anything that happens behind has no effect. Like, I'll show you what I mean. If I held this note, and if I move these fingers here, nothing changes. However, if I go this side, it does change. So, anything happening behind something being held down has no effect. Anything being held down or moved here on this side of your chord does have an effect. So if I was holding this chord, if I'm on this side, I'm going to mute all 4 strings. But if I went this side of it, you can hear that guy ringing out. So that's why you wouldn't do that. You would go this side. Okay, so get used to that. Next up, technique of 5. Left-handed mute for closed position chords, or I call these release mutes, just personally. Now these ones apply to chords where there are no open strings. Okay, so something like that C this mute wouldn't apply to that. It would apply to bar chords. So bar chords, that's a C bar chord. So a bar chord, you're holding down every string. And the big advantage to using this technique is that you have lots of control and it can be done very quickly and suddenly. Okay, so how did I create that sound? I basically squeezed my bar chord, so creating the sound, and then I stop squeezing, and my fingers, they come away from the fingerboard about 1 millimeter. Not very far. They don't go away like this. They stay touching the strings, but I don't squeeze anymore. So at the start you squeeze, strum to make the sound, release the pressure, and it stops. So try that again. Bar chord, release, and it's quiet. So try and get it consistent. Try and get control of like how long it's making sound and then when it's stopping. And once you get used to this technique, it can be used to create all kinds of cool rhythms. So that's just kind of a funk style. All that kind of funk guitar type stuff would use that. Okay, that was a left-handed mute for closed position chords, or as I call it, doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, so what I call it is release mutes. Release it to mute it. Okay, the next one, technique 6, palm muting. Now for some reason, lots and lots of people seem to think palm muting is doing this, but that wasn't. That was technique number 1. That's not what we're doing. Palm muting comes from like rock guitar and punk guitar. It's this whole story about overdriven loud guitars, and when it would get to the verse where people would want to hear the words, they would have to make their big loud distorted guitars suddenly go quiet. So if you don't have all kinds of effects and pedals and stuff around you, you can't control the volume of the guitar that way. So they had to do it with their hands. So what they did was, much like the technique we used when we were chucking, we used the side of our hand. So this part of your hand, it goes along all of the strings, right in front of and sort of on top of the saddle. So this part of your ukulele here, mine is currently black, yours is probably white. So this piece of plastic or bone, depending on your uke, or new bone, This piece here is the saddle, and that's where you want to lay your hand down, is just along that. So this is a bit of a stretchy one. When your hand is there, it's just very gently resting on it. Then you bring your index finger back and you strum. Now this technique, it's different to the others because you're trying to create one that is halfway between making sound and being quiet. So it's sort of a dampened sound. Like that. So it's different to a full strum and it's different to a muted strum. In between. Now, it's really about finding the sweet spot, because if you're far up here, you're going to totally mute it. And if you're too far down this side, you're not going to be muting anything. So if I started up really high, totally muting everything, and gradually worked my hand down, I'll hear more and more sound coming into it until there. So it's really key to keep your hand at 90 degrees, so straight along the saddle. Don't allow yourself to go like that or any weird wrist movements. Just karate chop down onto the saddle, bring your finger back and hit the strings. So this will be used for that kind of guitar sound, like that kind of punk guitar. But it can be used in melody as well. Very nice. Moving on to technique number 7. We have partial mutes. Now this one would be getting into fairly advanced territory. So this one, you're going to be muting some strings and not others. This becomes very important when you're doing things like chord melody, which is playing both rhythm and lead at the same time, squished into one piece. So I suppose I'll show you an example. It'll be something like... So what I did there was I held down this note here, and then I used my fingers to hold down the other strings so that only that first string is making sound, making a note. Then I lifted my finger slightly, just enough to free up this second string. Okay, so that's both of those two are now making sound, and these two are not. Okay, then I'm going to raise my fingers a tiny bit more, enough to free up this string, my third string. So that's muted, note, note, note. And then eventually take that off altogether, and I have 4. So that's just a simple example. Okay, it's a good way of really controlling your sound. Another really, while I'm in the area of explaining partial mutes, here's another really finite, advanced technique, but it's very useful. When it's needed, it's really needed. This one's quite tricky. If I was, say, holding down this C major chord, and imagine if for some reason I wanted to make this string go quiet, the second string, something that I could do is overreach with this finger. So instead of having good technique and pointing straight down from above, like that, like straight down, instead of doing that, I would just go a little bit too high with my finger and maybe go a little bit diagonal with my finger, so that this finger is now touching that second string and muting it. So it's doing 2 jobs. One, it's holding down the note on the first string, but the other job that it's doing is it's muting the second string. I don't know what the correct terminology for that would be, but I call it overreaching. You overreach with your finger and mute the string above. So you can find uses for that. That's pretty advanced. So hopefully that has given you some beginner, some intermediate, and some advanced muting techniques. So something to mess around with, and hopefully something very useful for you guys to practice and implement in your playing. Okay, that's been my 7 essential muting techniques for ukulele. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to give it a like, follow, all that stuff, and I'll talk to you soon, guys.